So we'll start off with Chelina Morton. She's a senior project manager at Pitt Meadows Plumbing, located in Vancouver, or Pitt Meadows, BC, I guess. She's now working on Royal Inland Hospital, which is a really big design-build project in Kamloops, as well as the new St. Paul's Hospital pursuit. Chelina has a little bit of a atypical career, if you will. She's actually has her BSc in biology, and no formal training in the construction or engineering realm. She just had a lot of interest in it, and now she's spent 11 years in industry. So one of the projects that really got BIM into her life was the Mars project for the public health in Ontario. That was an EllisDon project, I believe, yeah. And also Penticton Regional Hospital, which was in Penticton, also another BIM project. That was probably the first project with like 100% modeling mandate, yeah. So areas of interest for Chelina in the industry is how our buildings actually fit into the industry. So not just how they look aesthetically, but how do they serve the community? How do they have energy efficiency? And also how can they provide us with knowledge? So smart buildings, IoT, stuff like that. Next to Chelina, we have Cory Morrison. He is the senior estimator and the BIM manager at Arpi's Industries. Cory actually is a graduate from SAIT. He's a Red Seal journeyman, plumber, and pipe fitter. And he's got 15 years of industry experience and 10 years of BIM experience. So he actually leads the BIM department at Arpi's. And he's worked on projects like Brookfield Place, National Music Center, New Central Library, Shaw Data Center, Riddell Library, and the Bow. An area of interest in the industry for Cory is estimating. He's actually a GSC, right? Yeah, so in mechanical estimating, as well as BIM. And we asked the panelists to describe BIM in their words. So at the end of the segment, we'll get that in there too. But I want you guys to think as we're talking what BIM sort of means as a process to each of you. And then at the end, when we wrap up, we'll give you an understanding of what they think as well. Next to Cory, we have Ryan Dunn. He is the sprinkler design manager for Tyco, looking after Western Canada. So Ryan went to school in Toronto at Seneca College to do fire protection engineering. He's been in the industry for 11 years as well now. And he's worked on projects like the Bow, Brookfield Place, Calgary, and the YYC International expansion. And last but not least, we have Chris Lytle. He is the VDC manager at Modern Niagara. He's actually got his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and business management. And he's been in the industry for 18 years. So he's worked in a variety of sort of parts of the industry, from manufacturing, mechanical consulting, contracting, and design. And he's also worked in Australia and Canada. And Chris is very interested by the possibilities of modular design and sort of parametric modeling, and that transition that's going to happen in construction going towards manufacturing. And so without too much more, we're going to start off the conversation here. And Chelina, maybe you can help us with this, or Cory. Can you describe what the business process used to be like before BIM adaptation?
So it's funny because my company, we've been using Revit for a while now, so it's a little bit of a tricky one for me, but I'll summarize it this way. So we have a guy that works in our company. He's one of our superintendents on a site, and he doesn't really believe in the BIM process. And he was telling me one time how proud of himself was that he worked through the entire underground installation himself. He coordinated it with the structural foreman. They figured out where all the columns were going to be and how deep they had to dig for everything, and it was this big process for him. And I told him, I'm like, you know what's funny? The underground was a nightmare for me and my BIM guy, but my foreman, he didn't hear a word about it. We shipped him the pipe, and that was it. So I think that summarized it the best. So all to say, the installation and the coordination is frustrating and a lot of work for the office and the BIM side of things, but the guys in the field, they don't even know what happened.
Yeah. And then what about you, Cory? Because you used to be boots on the ground, old school before BIM.
Yeah, we work with some pretty talented site people. The generation before when BIM came out, it was a lot of hand drawings and things like that. We've seen a big difference with obviously coordination between all different disciplines at the same time. I'm looking at it from a couple different points of view, so estimating, obviously cost is a huge thing. BIM is critical, I think, in Calgary right now. I mean, it's part of what we do. It's part of being competitive and everything else, so.
All right, so changing it up. Oh, Ryan, you had something there? No? You good?
Yeah, I'll add my 2 cents just because it's a slightly different perspective being on the sprinkler side, which is a little bit more downstream in the process. For us, most of our processes are very similar. We have the same, toll gates that we would typically go through. Everything just tends to be a little bit more front-loaded on the design side.
Fair enough. So sort of building on the collaboration aspect of the event here, can maybe Chris, you elaborate on this, and Chelina jump in, but a key part of collaboration is communication. So do you have any lessons from a bad experience where maybe the communication wasn't so great and the collaboration suffered as a result?
Yeah, like a lot. I find that the BIM technologies, I look at it as a fire hose. And I think people lose sight of the fact that, especially early adopters, they think that it's some special thing. And really what it is it's a fire hose of communication. And when I look at a construction site in the past, I see mostly talented and very vested and interested parties that want to see success happen around them. That's just generally what I see everywhere, right? But what happened in the early days was BIM was this thing that was going to come and save stuff, and you'd hand it to a new department that doesn't know all of the trade knowledge that you were mentioning, and instead it's just like a really tiny echo chamber with not a lot of support, and they make what they think is a good idea, but it's not vetted nor communicated nor discussed with the greater group, and that usually falls flat. So I'd say that if you distill what I've seen a lot of problems be, it's like people don't understand that it's still a team effort, and you need to be collaborating with depth of knowledge and with the rest of your team, and that takes time.
To add to that too, training in like your company culture, like so bridging that gap between making a model and installing a model, and training your site people to do that and understand it and know where to go with problems. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. So early adopters suffer from that because it's a huge learning curve to try to take what was done for traditionally however long, like the last 50 years at least, and say you're going to look at this model now as opposed to just do it yourself. That process is huge. Like it's a huge undertaking to try to train people within organizations, site people to utilize the models.
Yeah.
So we're early adopters. We actually never worked in a CAD environment. We went straight to Revit about 5 or 6 years ago. So we have lots of people that are working for us that are in that age range of 25 to 30 that have been modeling for a long time, and we all think that they know exactly what they're doing because they've been doing it for a couple of years. Whereas when you're going back to classic construction, you would never assume such a thing. So that there's bad communication breakdown in that alone, and that you have this assumption that somebody knows exactly what they're doing. But unfortunately, sometimes the model doesn't really relay things perfectly, and if they have a question, they'll just kind of assume something and possibly pipe something wrong instead of really getting clarity, which unfortunately you learn the hard way. So that's definitely a big growing pain.
Fair enough. So the common theme being the culture, the process, the technology all coming together.
To further your comment, I've noticed that sometimes the site will get quiet, and a conversation is a two-way street, and you.
So I would say when we're modeling a floor, I will talk to my Revit guy and my coordinator every single day for weeks on end. And I don't hear anything from the site until we ship a bundle of pipe and all of a sudden he has a question. And that's a problem. It is a problem. We're working on it. We use Revitso actually to try and deal with this, where the site guys are going into the model and they're making comments and they're saying, actually, you can't really 90 in this location because of, and then he'll draw a sketch to show an as-built condition, and that's helping, but it's a long way to get there because the guys in the field, because we're early adopters, believe that the modelers should do everything correctly the first time. So that's the problem that we have.
So that actually dovetails sort of into the next question I had. And Chelina, this is good for you to really elaborate on, and then maybe Chris and Cory, you guys could explain. So Pitt Meadows, because you guys leverage BIM or that process regardless of the scope, almost a standard out of your factory, whereas I guess Chris, for you and Cory, Arpi's and Modern, you guys are a little bit more selective, right? So if there is a full mandate from the client and the GC, you guys might prefabricate and leverage that process. So how has this changed business for you guys? So we'll start off with Shalana, where you guys are doing this regardless of the client mandate, and then it'll be nice to hear from even all three of you, Ryan, about how you guys treat it on a project where there's no requirement. What's your business process? And then on a project where there are extensive requirements like some of the ones that you have worked on.
So for us, like Hammad said, BIM is just a process for us. It's never a question, are we going to BIM this job? It's always, okay, we're definitely going to Revit, so how are we going to do it? So if we don't have a structural model or an architectural model, we'll typically pay a third party to do that for us so that we can actually model all of our services. Because this is what we have found through trial and error. Like, I think we BIMmed our first job, probably Penticton, a couple of years ago, and that was fully BIMmed, and ever since we did that, we can never go back, just because the efficiency was so much higher than doing it the old school way, but that's how it's changed it for us.
Yeah, so BIM for us has been, it boils a lot down to cost control. Modeling something, you can really nail down costs as far as where your labor is. Is your labor in like a shop environment, or is your labor on site? There's lots of ways to kind of pull from that, but more or less, we found that BIM is super important with how you track your labor, how you track your material. You're really running lean projects at this point, and especially in Calgary. I don't know. Everybody that is probably bidding work here or looking at work here right now, it's a tough market. So you got to try to find that edge or that efficiency that you can basically translate out to the client. Yeah, more or less that's how we do it. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sure. So for us, there's it's a very different process. In the sprinkler side of things, at least locally for us, we find that a lot of our work is site coordinated. We're usually lowest in the totem pole, if you will, and we don't really, we're coordinating around everyone else rather than the other way around. So what BIM and having a tight design earlier in the project has allowed us to do is have a lot of prefabrication options available that typically aren't available to us. Like pre-inserting for concrete pours, that's something, heck, I think that was the pre-inserting on the Brookfield project was the first time we had done that. So it has given our company, or at least our industry, some options.
Operationally, that's the root of the question, correct? Yeah. So operationally, we don't do every project BIM. I would describe it as there's an expense to BIM, and we try to find things that are either risk or financially dense. So a mechanical room is a very dense room cost-wise to install. We'll BIM that. If there's a risky project that we've got in front of us with a lot of complexity, we'll probably BIM that if the owner doesn't require it. That kind of stuff, we'll make that decision at the front end. For smaller projects like tenant fit-ups, which are half-inch copper, 2-inch copper, and more smaller lines, we don't BIM all of that because the site workers are very good at that, and they're good problem solvers, and sometimes waiting for the BIM group may slow them down. So we sort of pick and choose how to apply the technology. For high risk, yeah, for sure. And if the owner requires it.
It's pretty interesting to see that all of these folks are related to the mechanical industry, they all leverage it differently, and they all have different processes. So one question I want to sort of jump into now is, how does contract type affect how you guys operate and leverage the technology? So, I mean, we can talk about design build or bid, hard bid, lump sum, CM. So Chris, how does that affect how you guys are operating? And Chelina, I think you could definitely add some insight there too.
Bid spec, the last few projects we've been doing, we sort of provided feedback as if it was design build if we're early enough on the critical path. So we would find value engineering, hopefully that benefits the owner or the GC, and we'd say, what do you think about this? I think it saves the electrical team or architectural, or we don't have to lower ceilings if we do this. So we'll still use it in like an RFI a heavy RFI with a lot of suggested change, and then provide it to the consultant for the review, and then if we get it, we get it, and if not, we not. In terms of design build, I find them really interesting, and on the Cancer Center, I think we've got some huge wins. We did something really neat where we sort of worked with Dialogue and gave them our mechanical systems, and it ended up saving tons and tons on sleeving because we gave them our carrier assemblies and had them model it, not us. And now their walls are starting to move for them and us. So you're cutting, like I'm convinced we save hundreds of RFIs on that.
So then what would you do if it was more of a hard bid process on that?
Well, you're late to the party, so you just sort of bring bad news.
And internally, would you guys still leverage the technology, or would you sort of abandon it because, there's no buy-in?
Say that again?
So like on the project with no requirements, say the GC or the architect aren't really modeling. I know Pitt Meadows, for example, they might go and create their own architectural model. Does that make business sense for you guys, or is it more like, okay, the GC's not doing it, the design team's not doing it, we're not going to waste our time unless it's a mechanical room?
Yeah, it's that, again, that question of like, what's our density of value? If we're really late to the party and our team can't mobilize or provide the model in the time because we were tendered yesterday, no, we won't do that because we can't. So we're actually fairly, if we're not hitting critical path, we actually try to suggest to our clients maybe it's time to abandon this floor or do a hybrid of something to that point. Because again, it's not operational on all of our systems yet, although we are looking towards
that. So starting with the design build and P3 part of it, that contract style has been amazing for BIM. I think in the construction industry, P3s have probably pushed BIM farthest forward than any other job just because of the expectations from the client. And what that does for us is it's really empowering as a contractor because all of a sudden you have the architect, the structural engineer, the mechanical engineer, the electrical person asking us for feedback on what works and what doesn't. And that's really helped us grow, especially our talent pool, because it also means that our BIM people are able to interact with all of those different parties and understand what their requirements are. In terms of a bid spec, we see there's a few clients in Vancouver that will ask for it, and they get a good product when they do. And if they don't ask for it, we still BIM because we manufacture everything in our shop, and in this shop environment and the tools that we have, we can only spool with Revit, all to say if we need to ship a bunch of material to the site, it must be Revited. So we're really kind of handcuffed by that. So we will still model it, just the output isn't going to be quite to the same standard as a P3 model would be.
All right, that's interesting. So I know earlier today we had some conversations of why use 2D at all, and why are we still sort of doing half BIM, half traditional approach. I think from a business and economic standpoint, hopefully these folks shed light on that topic. So moving forward a little bit, you did mention this a couple of times and it came up, is the workforce. And how do you recruit staff? How do you find new talent? How do you train? Is there a skill gap that you guys are finding when it comes to this?
So we're having a skill gap in just that I don't think a lot of people are in high school feeling like oh, I really want to be a BIM person. Like, I don't think that that's happening, unfortunately. So we're having to look into different industries to find these people, whether it be gaming technologies, computer science, architectural technologies, and then convincing them that it's a good career path. And training them is really just integrating them with the team. So not siloing them away from the site, just working at a computer, making them attend all of the meetings that we do with everybody, and making them understand how important they are as part of the process, and putting them side by side with our installers a lot of the time too.
A lot of our BIM techs are actually tradesmen, so they're either plumbers or pipe fitters. Actually, right now, one's a pipe fitter, one's a plumber, and one is a sheet metal worker. And we've had great success with it, honestly. They know what they're modeling. They take very little babysitting. They're very, very independent. We've had other BIM techs too. If we get really, really busy, we will hire third-party people, and typically they're not tradespeople. But the core guys, I mean, from my philosophy, I really do believe in, you know, if you can install it, you can model it, and we basically pluck young guys out of the field that, you know, just got their ticket, and they are eager to come into the office and model. I mean, that's a huge career change for them, and they absolutely love it. So that's our strategy.
For us, everything we do, at least locally, is design build. So first and foremost, everything that's typically been done in my design department has been from someone that's got a thorough understanding of sprinklers, codes, standards, and that's their background. So what we've found is some of these employees that we have that are really great sprinkler designers, they have a tough time in the BIM environment. So right now we've just started looking outside of the fire protection or the BIM or the sprinkler world, and we're trying to find people that have that BIM or that Revit capability, that skill set. So right now, I mean, for the first time nationwide anyways, we do have a number of requisitions open for Revit or BIM specific designers, rather than anyone that's got industry experience, which is new for us.
We sort of do a hybrid of everything said. We've got Red Seal journeymen working for us in multiple offices, including Calgary. We've got a number of engineers. We've got college students. We sort of, I think we follow what the apprenticeship trades do, which is a long 5-year training process, because building systems are extremely complex. The interactions to other trades is very, you know, there's a lot there. So we try to find highly motivated, intelligent, and, you know, ready to learn individuals that have great initiative. We also try to look for communicators. So back to the whole thing, like the modeling staff are authors that are assisting our site workers. So if they can't communicate, that's a problem.
Those are all really good points. One thing that I think that's really interesting, I think the diversity of the group here is there is no one clear-cut path, regardless of what side of the industry you are on. If you want to leverage, you know, a BIM-based process or construction technology, design technology. So the variety that you guys have just mentioned right now in how you acquire your talent, I think, really showcases that. So the next thing I want you guys to elaborate, if you don't mind, is how do you approach sort of project management principles and leverage digital sort of technology or BIM process? So in project management, you know, the 3 things, and I think Chelina, you know this really well, is cost or budget, our schedule, and our scope. So how does the modeling-based process really affect your business, and how does it help project management?
So I would say that the major benefit with the BIM process is that you get to control those constraints like substantially earlier than you typically would. Like once I've modeled a whole floor, I generally know how much it's going to cost, and if it was the original scope that I expected, and how long it's going to take to install. So from that perspective, it's hugely beneficial. It's almost like by the time we've modeled most of the building, like that concern of how I'm going to control all those things is mostly gone away. The other big part of that is amazing to me as a part of this whole process is that I think before BIM was really common, things would get done in the field that none of us really knew were happening. I think if an installer approached like a strange detail in a drawing, he just kind of did something that he thought was right, and sometimes it's not right. But with BIM, you don't have that scenario because we see it. We see what you're going to do, and we're going to send you exactly that. So it really reduces the likelihood of schedule issues and cost issues surrounding rework.
Okay, awesome. And for Cory and Ryan, can you guys help explain how the folks in the field use the process? So if you're on a project and say you are using the full BIM approach and the owners mandated it, how do the guys or the girls in the field leverage the technology? Because one of the biggest issues that we've seen is we could plan with our design teams and ourselves and even the mechanical and electrical contractors, but then when the boots in the ground go their own way, that is the weakest link in the chain for us, right? So how do you guys uphold that? What do you see? Is there any sort of common trend out of that?
All of our foremen and superintendents have iPads with the Navisworks models right on them. So it's common when you're walking around site now to see our site guys and our leaders with an iPad basically showing anybody a model, and that's honestly one of the best ways that we found to do that. At Brookfield, we went through weekly meetings and we brought in all of our site staff into that, like our leaders, right? And just kind of to add to the cost thing too, at Brookfield Place, it was a project we did with EllisDon. We Victaulic grooved all the 2.5-inch joints on that whole job, and we didn't have one Vic machine on site. Every single piece of, yeah, it was awesome. Honestly, it was a huge accomplishment. Like every piece of pipe was made in our shop, and that was it. And so, just kind of segueing from that, but like the benefits are huge, and the iPads and whatever you're using to translate that information to site is critical to making a system like that work. Eventually, hopefully, we can get into like augmented reality, because like that's what I want to see, where you have the visor and you can actually see what you're installing. You have it? Oh. I know what I'm asking for at work tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I can't wait to see that too. I think the VR guy is going to need a spotter though, because it's otherwise it's a safety thing. But for us, we're much the same. We've I think on Brookfield we ended up working closely with Arpi in the mechanical, and our foreman on that job was less comfortable with the software. But what we've started doing is if our foreman's not someone that's necessarily going to have time or want to use the model, we'll designate almost like a junior foreman that will be in charge of looking up and reviewing that. The benefit for us is we find there's a lot fewer assumptions between design intent and what's being communicated to the installer and what's being installed. So what we tend to see, at least some of my designers, is if they're unsure of something or if there's some gray areas and they're not really sure what to do, rather than clearly addressing that, they'll be a little bit vague in some of their notes and descriptions, and it tends to lead to a lot more assumptions on the install side. So BIM's really helped avoid that, and it's definitely a useful tool in that aspect.
Shalana, I think the headset thing got people intrigued, so do you want to elaborate on that? And as we're getting close to wrapping up, if you guys have any questions, please, consolidate them. I think it'd be good. You finally have a chance to poke some folks who are in the industry on the mechanical side, which a lot of people in the BIM sort of realm will know is typically the more advanced side in terms of adaptation. And again, it's baked into some of their business processes. Some of them, it's dependent on the clients. So please think hard, make sure you guys really test them.
So we have the VR goggles similar to the ones that are being demonstrated over there. And how we've used them is for a mechanical room, we'll prefab all of the skids in our shop, and then we align them how they'll actually fit in the real space. And then when you put the goggles on, you can see all of the other elements in the room. So that's the idea. You can actually walk around the room in real time. So it's really great for people who haven't been to tons of construction sites and understand what the constraints are. Obviously, I think our biggest hiccup in the whole thing is that the model is massive to load, and the goggles can only take so much capacity. But it is really cool, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops in the future.
Awesome. All right.
30 years ago was the cusp of BIM being developed. If you could go back in time and meet me, what would be the one thing you would tell me to do to make your life easier today?
Right off the top of my head, I'd tell you it's hard. Don't quit because it's hard, or because it costs a lot of money at first. That's what I would say. Somebody said earlier that there's no manual on how to build a building, and that's true. When we first started, we were all blaming each other of, this guy doesn't know how to do his job, or that guy's an idiot because he did something wrong. And ultimately, it's just hard because it's new. Don't quit, just keep going. I think that's kind of an issue a lot of people have when they're trying out something new, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, that more or less, it's hard to kind of envision to be honest with you, for me, what it was like 30 years ago. For every day that I've been in the trade, computers and technology being a vital part of it, even before we were doing a full integrated BIM process. But I more or less agree with Shalana on that one. I'd tell you invest in Apple, and then we could split the diff on that, but.
Yeah, I guess I probably echo those points as well. For me, I think what we're seeing with the adoption of BIM, and this is kind of the new generation of building design, I'm sure it's similar to a lot of the growing pains that happened when we were originally moving over to computer-assisted design. It's not really a matter of whether or not you should or you will adopt it. It's just how you're going to get there. And I think every trade's got different routes there. And I think you just got to stick with it.
I would say 30 years ago, go work in aerospace or oil and gas. Don't work in buildings. Your computers, you can't afford them. It's not worth it. 20 years ago, I'd say you're a little early. Go into the chief executive suites and get their buy-in. And then get a team of the people that know what they're doing. That's what I would say.
Thank you. John Carlos, you have a question there? No? Any other questions? Right there in the back. So the question there is, do you think BIM is a useful term, or sometimes is it sort of like BIM washing? I think that's a very, very good point. I don't want to speak for everyone, but we've really felt that. So people think, oh, BIM, and because they don't understand it as a process, they think of it, oh, okay, it's just a 3D model. That's the deliverable. Where we have issues is it's actually a process, and it's not one size fits all. And so, you know, in the construction side of things, that's why VDC, or virtual design and construction, is more of the nomenclature that we prefer. Yeah, what about you guys?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I remember the first time that I was being told about BIM, it was in the context of once we're done building the building, you're going to get BIM to the facilities maintenance people, I think was how it was being sold. And at that term, it was like a product. And I think people are still thinking of it that way, which is a problem. Like Hammad said, it's a process. Like it's the heart of how we operate. Without BIM, we would have probably employing 50% of the people. Like I would say 90% of what we do all comes out of the process of BIM. So it's not just this end product. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, VDC is probably the best way, I think, to describe it. I mean, it's really what we do, virtual design construction. BIM is thrown around, it's a hot word. You see it in specs, you see it in bid documents, whatever. I mean, there's lots of levels of BIM. So are you the kind of contractor or general contractor that can fabricate out of their models, or are you really just drawing it for I mean, it happens where it's just a pretty picture, right? A technicality to meet a specification. So, yeah, BIM is a really loose term. I don't like it, but VDC is more or less the way to go, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for me, if I'm looking at a project and they indicate that there are BIM requirements, if I can, I like to get the BIM execution plan, and I can usually determine from there if they do mean BIM or if they're using it loosely as a replacement for VDC.
I agree.
Any other questions before we wrap up and I guess cocktail hour starts? All right, well, if you guys have any questions and you don't want to ask in front of anyone, feel free to reach out to any of us or to Jerry, and we'll talk offline. Thank you.